Okay, good morning all again. A very warm welcome to the guest today, and it's been very easy commute for him today. Luckily, he stayed very close by, so it's an honor for me to introduce the guest today. Dr. Sanjay Sarin is the Chief Executive Officer of IKP Knowledge Park. He is responsible for providing leadership for IKP's strategic plan development as well as implementation of current and planned operations while ensuring continued engagement with partners, funders, and key stakeholders. Sanjay joined IKP from FIND, where he was the VP of Access and Regional Programs and was responsible for managing FIND's Global Access Program as well as FIND's regional offices in India, Kenya, Vietnam, South Africa, and Indonesia. Sanjay also led FIND's country's preparedness work under the diagnostic pillar of Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, that is ACTA-A, a global initiative aimed at supporting country response to COVID-19. Prior to FIND, Sanjay was with BD, that is Becton Dickinson, where he was the Regional Director of Global Health for the Asia Pacific and was responsible for design, development and implementation of BD's public health strategies. During his stint with BD, Sanjay also managed the pre-analytical system business unit for South Asia. Before BD, Sanjay was with Clinton Health Access Initiative, where he served as a regional lab specialist and was a part of the CHIA's global LSD. During his stint with CHIA, he was instrumental in supporting scale-up of HIV/AIDS programs across multiple countries in Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. He has his PhD in biochemistry from PGIMR, Chandigarh, India. He received advanced training in non-profit management and holds a diploma in negotiation mastery from Harvard Business School. He has an experience of more than 25 years in portfolio management, strategic planning, operations and market access across private and non-profit sectors. So with this illustrious career, sir, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The dais is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I think the pleasure is entirely mine. I'm really privileged, and thank you to Dr. Balganesh for inviting me to be a part of your series of lectures, and many congratulations on achieving this milestone of 25 years. And I think coincidentally it also aligns with IKP hitting its 25 years, and we celebrated this in the IKMC, which is the national conference, last year in October. So this is the 25th year. So in a way it is great that these two great organizations are sort of celebrating this very important milestone going forward. So as Srividya mentioned, I don't come from the drug development side, so my apologies in advance if I'm unable to respond to some of your questions, because you guys are the experts. But I have tried to sort of keep it pretty high level, coming at it from the perspective of what the world is looking at today. It is the next pandemic. When we are talking about the antimicrobial resistance, there's obviously a lot of encouraging work happening in this space, Gangajan being one of the protagonists there, and we'll talk through some of the pipelines in terms of the drug development, and then some of the key trends as far as specifically the technology trends as far as drug development is concerned, how technology like AI and advanced manufacturing and stuff are being put to use. We'll also briefly touch upon diagnostics. I'm not spending too much time, maybe a slide, because oftentimes diagnostics is the most neglected child. I was talking to Srividya in the morning, when COVID happened, this word or the acronym VTDs became very, very famous, vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics. Unfortunately, I feel that unless there is a diagnostic, there is not a therapeutic, and there's definitely not a vaccine. So I wish it would be other way around, DVT, although DVT stands for deep vein thrombosis, which is obviously a deadly disorder.
So is your mic working with it?
Yeah, it's more
okay.
for the recording, yes, but it won't amplify the...
Am I audible?
Okay, thanks.
And briefly towards the end, we'll also talk about some of the pull mechanisms. The push piece is obviously the funding, whether it is coming from the public sector, private sector, or from the developmental sector. It is becoming a bit crazy right now. I'm sure all of you are hearing what is happening in the US. Certainly large swaths of funding are being pulled, and I'm sure that's going to impact the overseas developmental assistance, which was already on a bit of a decline, because a lot of the countries are experiencing economic challenges also. But having said that, there are obviously other areas which potentially can be explored to access push funding, and then the pull mechanisms which are lacking in a country like India, where the problem of AMR is so acute, but nevertheless it needs to be there just to ensure that when developers are spending billions of dollars in developing these drugs, there has to be some sort of an access pipeline to ensure or a pull mechanism to ensure that these drugs actually reach those who need them the most. So I'm sure you would have heard of this, this one of the largest studies, the global burden of bacterial antimicrobial resistance, which was published in Lancet in 2024. This is in fact the first global analysis of antimicrobial resistance trends over time. And as you know better than anyone, antimicrobial medicines are one of the cornerstones of modern healthcare, and increasing resistance to them is very rapidly becoming a major cause of concern. As per this report, which they've done a outward projection to 2050, and it is being projected that more than close to 40 million people could actually die from antibiotic resistance over the next 25 years. And the estimates from this new study actually were produced for about 22 pathogens, 84 pathogen drug combinations, and 11 infectious syndromes, including meningitis, bloodstream infections, and others, among people of all ages in about 204 countries. So a fairly comprehensive analysis. And estimates are based on about 520 million individual records that were accessed across these settings and in the countries. So as per the report, more than 1 million people died from AMR globally each year, between 1990 and 2021. And there's a good and the bad part. The AMR deaths, they actually declined in children less than 5 by about 50%, while they increased, in people greater than 70 years of age by almost 80%. And the forecasts, they further, are pretty grim in terms of the AMR mortality increasing by almost 70% by 2050 and is largely going to impact older people. And I think this is a serious challenge, because as medical treatments become better, surgical procedures are becoming more advanced, people are expected to live longer. Already the life expectancy is on the rise, and which means that the longer you live, the higher your risk is to contract these deadly infections. Typically among the gram-negative bacteria, I'm sure you already know this, resistance to carbapenems, it increased more than any other antibiotic class. Also on the silver lining was that improved access to healthcare and antibiotics. And I'm talking about, when you talk about antibiotics, it's not just the existing antibiotics, it is also the newer antibiotics. Could actually save a total of 92 million lives between 25 and 50. For the gram-negative drug scenario, 11.1 million AMR deaths would actually be prevented through development of a gram-negative drug pipeline. And we will talk in subsequent slides that there is in fact an increased focus now on developing gram-negative antibacterial drugs. So this is something which I kind of already spoke about. The deaths basically attributable and associated with AMR by age. So just to distinguish between what is attributable and associated, is that deaths attributable to AMR are the ones that are directly caused by the drug-resistant infections, while the deaths associated with AMR are the deaths that occurred from a drug-resistant infection, but the mortality was not necessarily on account of that infection. So as you can see, this is the data, which compares, figures between 1990 and 2021, and as you can sort of clearly see, that in children less than 5 years of age, there was a significant decline, in terms of the mortality. But as you move up, towards the outer years, specifically when you're looking at 50 to 80 years of age, there was a significant increase in mortality on account of AMR between 1990 and 2021. Then also another cut, deaths attributable by pathogen. I think this is also critical for both scientists, as well as developers. So as this is for deaths attributable to AMR by pathogens in individuals 5 years and older. As you can see that there has been an increase in the number of deaths, which I sort of spoke about in the previous slide. But when you look at the pathogen share of the AMR, attributable deaths, while there was a general sort of a decrease, across these, so they basically did this across 6 or 7 key bacteria. but it specifically went up for Staph aureus, and I think somewhere it connects with the work that Gangajan is also doing. I heard in the morning the new bacteriophage that you guys are developing. So that's one key statistic. Pneumonia, obviously, I think as you will see in deaths attributable by pathogen, in younger than 5 years, although there was a general decline, in terms of the mortality, but across the bugs, you can see that a higher proportion is actually, impacting or causing this mortality, which is also pointing towards, the more serious drug infections like CRAB and CRE and 3G CRE that we are already encountering. Streptococcus pneumoniae, obviously you see that there was a decline, and this is largely also because of the universal immunization programs where children are being inoculated by the pneumococcal vaccine. A little bit of the global deaths on account of AMR by region. Unfortunately, as you see here from this graphic, the future deaths from AMR are actually going to be the highest in the South Asia, which is our region actually. Particularly when you look at India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, where there's a projection of almost 12 million deaths happening over the next 25 years. So, which I think is but obvious because of the rampant prescription of the antibiotics that is happening in these countries, but not just here, even in Africa or in other low and middle income countries, because while there are national action plans for AMR control which are being put into place, but there's not much action happening in terms of the implementation of these national action plans. Also, the AMR surveillance efforts are while they are on the up, a lot of the countries they are leveraging the surveillance systems that were established during the pandemic to monitor their AMR infections, but still there is a lot that needs to be done. In India also, there continues to be a confusion because there is a network which is managed by NCDC, there's a network which is managed by ICMR. Unfortunately, these two networks don't talk to each other, which is a problem. But nevertheless, there is still a lot of work that is happening. Specifically at ICMR, I'm sure you've heard of Dr. Kamini Walia. She's the one who's driving these efforts against AMR. She's trying to put a lot of mechanisms into place to collect data from both public and private hospitals, and they're now getting into the tier 2 cities, with smaller hospitals. They're trying to set up all of those AMR stewardship programs. I mean, it's a long way. I mean, in India specifically, it is going to be a huge challenge. Specifically when you're looking at secondary hospitals, or especially the primary health hospitals where some admissions are also happening. And there are so many different classes of clinical settings that are there in this country. It is particularly challenging to be able to implement AMR stewardship programs and HICCs at that scale. This is another study that I came across. This was some data which was essentially the Barnard study, or the burden of antibiotic resistance in neonates from developing countries. So there were about almost 20 to 30,000 women and children who were included in this prospective study across 12 clinical sites. And as you see, these are all LMICs where there is a rampant use of antibiotics happening: Bangladesh, Ethiopia, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. And here again, as I said, about 30,000 mothers and neonates were enrolled over a period of 3 years. The incidence of clinically suspected sepsis was about 166 per 1,000 live births, and laboratory confirmed was about 46.9. Critically, as you say, importantly, that majority of these laboratory confirmed sepsis, they actually happened in the first 3 days of life. So I think a very small window, for the clinicians, and actions need to happen at all levels, in terms of increasing awareness as far as these populations are concerned, because a lot of these deaths are actually happening in the rural settings where home births are still happening, even though the institutional deliveries are on the rise. But still there is a challenge, specifically even when they are being born in the hospitals, there is a challenge in terms of infection control, which is causing this high rates of sepsis happening in the early days of life. This is something I'm sure you're all aware of. Just a little bit about the antibacterial agents in clinical development, and this is from the WHO pipeline. These are the WHO bacterial priority pathogens on your left. As you see here, as of December 2023, there were about 97 antibacterial agents with new therapeutic entities, which were targeting the WHO BPPs, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, Clostridium difficile, and H. pylori, and they are in different phases of clinical development. But as you see from this graph, most of these antibacterials are actually in the early stages of clinical development. And then the other pieces are of the 32 products, and these are not the ones which are targeting MTB, CD, and H. pylori. 18 have evidence of some activity against a gram-negative pathogen, and 8 are targeting crab, and 15 are targeting CRE or either 3G CRE. These are as far as the traditional antibacterials are concerned, and then you look at the non-traditional antibacterials, again 13 bacteriophages, so I think you guys are right on track in terms of your work on phages. 7 antibodies, and then there is obviously antivirulence agents, immune modulating agents, and microbiome modulating agents. I think these are also something which is becoming hugely popular. Just to sort of compare the activity across traditional and non-traditional antibacterial agents against bacterial priority pathogens of WHO from between 2017 and 2023 pipeline. As you can see here, the total number of products addressing WHO BPPs, it increased from 43 to 62 in 2023, which is obviously very heartening. I heard, and I think you also mentioned, that agents with activity against gram-negative bacteria, they're becoming increasing focus, and here you see that there was an increase from 35% to 50% between 2017 and 2023, and the number of extended spectrum agents, they in fact which are targeting both gram-negative and gram-positive bugs, they also increased from just 1 drug in 2017 to about 8 in 2023. So this is a sort of a split, in terms of the formulations as far as the candidate antibiotics are concerned from 2017 and 2023. As you can see from this graph, both the 2017 and 2023 pipelines, they dominated in terms of the IV formulations. The proportion of oral antibiotics has actually went down from 47 to 37% between 2017 and 2023. Also, the number of agents which are targeting both IV and oral formulations, they also went down from 37% to 25%, which is actually a serious challenge, because when you're specifically talking about children, oral formulations are something which are much needed. And there is another challenge we'll talk about as far as pediatric formulations are concerned. Then this is another sort of a snapshot where they took the global burden of AMR and they tried to superimpose it on the development pipeline as far as the new antibacterials are concerned. And slightly smallish, my apologies, but I just wanted to show a general trend. Bottom you see the burden of disease as far as and they were basically tracking it for about 6 bugs, as you can see, and on top you see the antibacterial candidates across critical, high, and medium priority pathogens. And as you can see that there are limitations to this study, because obviously some of the bugs that were included in the gram study, they are not necessarily WHO BPPs yet, so there is some disconnect there. I think it is more or less aligned. I think there are some exceptions. One, that there is a lot of development happening as far as Pseudomonas aeruginosa is concerned, and Streptococcus pneumoniae, even though the burden is high, I think there's another disconnect there, and that is largely because of the very effective immunization protocols that are in place for Streptococcus pneumoniae. That is limiting the production of the drugs. Very quickly talking about the top 9 drug development trends and innovations in 2025. So this was out of an analysis which was done by, this is a very interesting website known as Startups Insights. They essentially looked across about 2,000 odd startups and emerging companies, and they came across these 9 drug development trends. I'll talk about this a little bit here, and these are largely, as you see, AI, big data, and computing. They are actually exponentially increasing drug discovery. In the subsequent slide, we'll also see some of the specific programs that are being put into place by both global as well as national pharmaceutical companies. Advanced manufacturing, via automation of processes, by integrating robotics, immersive tech, and whole lot to sort of predict losses and improve product development. Then there is a lot of advances which is happening in assay development through modified phenotypic assays as well as label-free technologies. They are looking at optical and impedance biosensors to be able to measure changes in cells and molecules following action of antibiotics. And then there is, a huge emerging trend about patient-centric and virtual trials. As you all know better than anyone, that clinical trials is something which is very, very expensive. So they are now trying to put Gen AI to use to see how they can design, trials keeping patients in mind, keeping specific populations in mind, so that they can be faster and they can be more targeted and also be less expensive. Going forward. So specifically talking about Gen AI as far as the pharma industry is concerned, and there's a fantastic report which was done by McKinsey, and there's a very recent report in 2024, and as you can see, the Gen AI is impacting the entire value chain of drug development, right from research and early discovery. For example, Gen AI, as you know, can process vast amounts of information, whether it is literature or data or patents, to be able to provide novel insights, something which people have been doing manually so far. Then I'm sure you're aware of specific programs that are being put into place to protect molecular interactions, to identify new drug targets and lowering the failure rates. The trial design, it is being increasingly impacted by Gen AI. It is being put into effect very, very clinically by a lot of the pharma companies to see how they can bring down the costs and make these trials more effective. Procurement and supply chain management, and this is largely connected to the operations piece. This is through virtual assistants, robotics and immersive tech, as I spoke about in the previous slide. These are being put into place to see how this can be optimized to reduce wastage. Then coming to regulatory, that is another huge challenge. So they're looking at automated medical and regulatory reviews to reduce the regulatory bottlenecks, and so that you are able to clear your submissions the first time or the second time and not wasted too much time. And then from a medical affairs standpoint, which is where the commercialization angle comes into play, is that they're using insights from interactions with healthcare providers to see that how they can optimize the literature that they're putting out into use, so that the adoption of these drugs can be better and faster when it comes to the market. This is again, some specific examples. AI, as is very clear, has the potential to save up to 70% of time and costs, for drug discovery. On your left, you see, how the capital investments in AI-driven drug discovery companies have been over the years, and as you see, there's a constant increase even in the 2020s. And here you see some specific examples. For example, for instance, J&J. They are leveraging AI and machine learning to improve their understanding of biological drivers of complex disease processes. Merck has a very effective software known as Addison, I'm sure you've heard, which they're using for computer-aided drug development. There are about 19 drug candidates that they have right now, which are in some one way or the other connected to artificial intelligence. Origin, which is a very local sort of an agency, and their CDMO has again developed an Origin.ai software, which they are increasingly using for drug development. Sanofi, they have been using AI to sort of study the target patient populations and leverage them for designing their clinical trials and protocols. And then another use for AI is that there is a company called Reprocell, and they have this software known as Pharmacology AI, where they're actually using this to identify optimal patient profiles, which basically means differentiating between the responders and non-responders, which means that they're already weeding out potential non-responders and increasing the target profile as far as the drug candidates are concerned. And all this obviously means that there is going to be a surge in the demand for AI expertise. Right now there are about 18 to 20% of the pharma workforce is sort of expected to have AI skills by 2027, which will be up from about 7 to 8%. As there's a very common saying, all of us sort of hear this every day, is that AI is going to take our jobs away. I think it's not AI which is going to take the jobs away, it is the people who know AI are probably going to take the job away. So then I think talking about, just sort of summarizing this, of the 128 distinct programs in clinical antibacterial pipeline, aimed at treating bacterial priority pathogens, only 16 have so far received market approval. In the WHO antibacterial pipeline, only 21 antibiotics currently in development in oral form. Then again, the pipeline of antibacterial agents, there are merely 6 products, with an approved or amended pediatric investigation plan or pediatric study plan, which means that there is a serious challenge as far as when you're combining both the trend around oral antibiotics and looking at the pediatric investigation plans is clearly pointed towards a huge gap as far as availability of drugs for pediatric infections is concerned. And then most of the drug development is actually still happening in the global north. While there is effort, it is not comparable to the efforts and the funding that is in place as far as drug development when you're comparing global north with global south. And then again, if you look at the profile of the companies, while on one end we say that there has been an increase in the number of bacterial candidates which have become available or are in development from between 2017 and 2023, the big pharma is still not engaging. They still don't think this is where they want to put the money, because their development takes billions of dollars, and then obviously putting them into the market, there's a lot of effort to put those drugs into the market, and hence you see that it is the small and the micro enterprises where there is a lot of drug development happening, and that is where I guess Gangajan also fits. A lot of critical work is being done there, and hence there need to be mechanisms to be put in place where funding can come in from both private public sources to be able to support such efforts. So looking at this, there were some key recommendations which came from WHO around the WHO on the antibacterial agents in clinical and preclinical pipeline. And this is one is obviously talking about how can we improve access to all of these drugs that are coming out, and then prioritizing innovation. The third very clear trend is that increasing oral formulations because of the challenges around the candidates in oral pipeline, increasing pediatric treatment options, supporting research and development LMICs, as there's a lot of development happening in the high income countries. Then how do you provide funding and incentives for small enterprises, because that is where a lot of the drug development is actually happening, and expanding research into non-traditional agents, which I guess somewhere Gangajan is already doing that or has been doing that since the very beginning on the pages. Very quickly, diagnostics is something which obviously cannot be ignored. And specifically when you're talking about new drugs, I think there is an increasing conversation on how do you protect those new drugs, because if you start prescribing them rampantly like the way normal antibiotics are being prescribed, very quickly there'll be drug resistance developing to those new candidates. So I took the liberty of taking this slide from my previous organization, at Find. So essentially, 3 buckets which sort of largely capture the global trends. One is around supporting R&D for rapid and accessible diagnostics. So there is a need for simplified blood culture and IDST platforms at levels at level 2, which is essentially the community health centers or the district levels. And then more importantly, point of care tests for diagnosis of severe infections and companion diagnostics for appropriate use of newer antibiotics. And rapid and improved diagnostics for sexually transmitted infections. While we are at STIs, I just wanted to, I'm sure some of you have heard that there is a new drug called zoliflodacin, which has been developed for superbug NG, which is super drug resistant. So at Find, we were developing a lateral flow assay to be able to pick up NG, and this is being trialed extensively in South Africa. We're working with IPD. So this has shown excellent correlation with the molecular tests, specifically the ones which are developed by Cepheid and all the other molecular diagnostic companies. It is a very simple test. You put it into a reader, apply the specimen. This works equally well on both the swabs from women and urine from men. We are seeing now, and this is likely to now pick up now that US has pulled funding as far as PEPFAR is concerned from a lot of these high HIV burden countries. There's going to be a serious increase in the STIs. We are already seeing that in a lot of these high burden settings. Even in India, where the national prevalence is very low, it's about 0.2%. But when you look at the high risk groups like commercial sex workers and all of the others, there is a very high incidence of HIV, and that is where I think this is probably the next pandemic which is going to create serious challenges.
What's driving that? This increase of NG, for example.
So as you know, BG, I think there were a lot of programs that were put into place by PEPFAR, which included prevention programs. There was this mass use of condoms and all of that. But what is now being seen is that there is a fatigue that has kicked in. the novelty of these programs has worn off. And I think somewhere the pandemic also was responsible, because a lot of time people were actually closeted at homes, and there was limited access to all of these prevention agents. So this is what when we were in South Africa, I think last year, and we were discussing this with IPD, which was the trial partner for Pine for this new drug, and they were seeing that new strategies now need to be put into place as far as prevention is concerned. There are obviously newer agents, sort of, which are being now explored in terms of preventing transmission of sexual infections. But it's largely because initially there was a lot of success because of these programs, but because they're still reinforcing the same message. I think it is now sort of falling through, and also the younger population, I think they're not getting impacted hugely by this messaging, and that is where you are seeing a very rampant increase in all of these sexual transmitted infections. So yeah, and then the HIV burden, it has not really plateaued, frankly speaking, as far as a lot of these countries are concerned. And associated with that obviously is this rising scourge of the STIs as well, because of the immune status. And then the second bucket is around how do you implement the currently available diagnostic solutions as far as severe infections are concerned. There is no culture of culture, as we all know. I think culture is something which is normally prescribed when you're seriously ill, when you're in an intensive setting. It is rarely prescribed in an outpatient setting, and that is something which is giving rise to all of these serious AMR infections. Then obviously digital solutions, they need to be put into place. It is not easy to interpret the results from all of these culture platforms that are being put into place, and fortunately all of these companies which are now investing in these platforms, they're also looking at digital solutions in terms of how to interpret these results. Also important because there is then a link to surveillance, because the data can then directly be fed into the surveillance systems. That is another problem in India, because there is no singular or uniform surveillance system which can actually plug into the hospital information systems. Specifically the private sector, they're very resistant to taking on any new surveillance system which will ride onto their HIS. One is obviously the data. They're obviously seriously concerned, and they're not even sharing whatever is happening. So there obviously needs to be there need to be solutions where these systems are talking to each other. There is more interoperability that is being put into place. And then obviously there is still a lot of data that is being collected, but is this data really being put into use as far as policies are concerned, as far as national action plans or state action plans on AMR control is concerned. So obviously critical need to decentralize these connectivity solutions to the settings at level 1 and level 2, and then obviously HAI surveillance is another critical tool, largely a tertiary setting where you see most of these tools in play. And then there is the human health and the animal health interface. We are all seeing what happened during the pandemic, and it is very critical that there is an interoperability between the human health and the animal health surveillance systems. And now there is another angle of environmental health that is also coming into play because of all the conversations around One Health. Busy slide, I'll not go through this, but this is a really interesting one. I'm sure some of you may have seen this. This is a sort of a dashboard by the Global AMR R&D Hub, which at the click of a button tells you what are the kind of investments that are being made, where are these investments happening, what are the kind of drugs, which countries, very, very interesting data. The total investment is still significant, and this includes the private and the public investment both. It's in excess of $11 billion. It also tells you about the number of research organizations, the countries where these research organizations are based, and also the One Health sectors that are into play. So, and then very quickly, who is funding what? It's just an extract from the dashboard on the previous slide.
Sanjay, just in the previous slide, if you looked at the same scenario for oncology, how would it look? That number, for example, at 11.13 billion.
I won't know it offhand, BG, but I won't know it offhand. But what do you think is your sense?
I think it will be 5 to 10.
Probably a lot higher.
Again,
probably a lot higher. Because that is where all the big pharma is also putting their investments, instead of investing in the antibiotics. So majority of the AMR, related R&D funding is still, into therapeutics and basic research. And then diagnostics, obviously this is also a little bit dated because the last cut was about 2021, so this may have changed. I think vaccines probably have overtaken diagnostics now because of the, increased focus during the pandemic on the development of new vaccines with, organizations like CEPI and all which are coming into play. Then product related R&D, this represents a significant proportion of the total investments, so just about 41%. Human health, continues to hog the limelight. 84% of the research or the work or the funding is actually going to the human health associated projects, which is again a challenge because animal health is not something that we can, ignore because of this, close interaction between the animals and the humans. And when you look at humans, obviously livestock is something where the bulk of the work is happening as compared to the other sectors followed by poultry. Yeah, I spoke early on, about some of the pull mechanisms, that are being put into place for, to encourage R&D in antibiotics and, also to sort of make sure that how are the developers able to recover the money or the investments that are being put into place for the development of these drugs. So Japan, for example, they have something known as an antimicrobial securement support program. I think this provides a revenue guarantee for the differences between actual sales and the estimated size of the target antimicrobial candidate. So far, they have this cefiderosol which has been selected for 2 years running under ASSP. It is not a very expansive program, but at least they're thinking about, how to compensate the drug developers. Italy is another one. This is right now in development. In 2024, as early as October, they announced measures to reward successful developments of antibacterials. So aim is they've sort of put together this innovation fund, which is $100 million, which is frankly not a lot of money. But more importantly, what they're saying is that is to sort of grant newly and recently approved antibiotics direct access to this funding, and this is something that will be available until patent or data exclusivity expires. UK, I think they're the most evolved as far as pull mechanisms are concerned. They're also the most evolved as far as the push mechanisms are concerned, like CARB-X, GAMREF. CARB-X is obviously US, but GAMREF, for example, and Fleming Fund, they are really, forward. They have this UK-wide antimicrobial product subscription model, and this is in fact the first global example of pharma manufacturers receiving financial remuneration for the products which is based on their value to patients. And they're essentially, evaluating this on 17 criteria across 3 domains: relative effectiveness and unmet need, novelty and resistance, and health system benefit. Sweden is another one, which they have implemented this. They reformed the national systems for novel antibiotics back in 2018, and they're looking at new, high medical need candidates. 6 antibiotics so far have been benefited, and they're now expanding this program to include other Nordic countries. So in summary, from a drug resistance pipeline standpoint, from a disease burden standpoint, as we saw, there is a significant increase in AMR mortality, which is projected over the next 25 years. The pipeline is looking good. There are about 97 antibiotic candidates. Then there is a broader shift to gram-negative, both good and bad. There is also growth in non-traditional antibacterials. You're looking at bacteriophages and antivirulence agents, and there is a reduction in oral formulations or availability of oral formulations over time. From a diagnostics and surveillance standpoint, there's a need for rapid, accessible, and including point-of-care diagnostics for severe infections. Critical need to strengthen AMR surveillance, for the human and the animal systems to talk to each other, and then obviously digital solutions in AI they need to integrate to improve clinical decision making. AI and pharma innovations, there are several trends like AI and advanced manufacturing and virtual trialing and all of that, which are really picking up. And AI adoption, pharma workforce is projected to rise. And then last but not the least, funding and policy. Significant funding still directed towards human R&D, and probably it is still not getting what it should be in terms of the availability of funds. and then both push and pull mechanisms are absolutely critical to ensure that there's not only development but also access to the newly developed drugs. So that's it from my side.
Thank you. Sanjay, just one question. This NG diagnostic that you said Find was involved. Does Find actually do the R&D or it funds?
So it funds also, and it gets engaged in co-development. So obviously we find it doesn't have its own labs. So the way it works is typically that let's say there's a target product profile, and they will launch an RFP to identify companies or candidates who are working in this space, and then the Finds team would then work very closely with these guys to co-develop the product. The clinical trialing was entirely taken care of by Find. I mean, funded, and the protocol design, responsibility, everything with Find. The buck stops there. I mean, obviously, Find had trial partners in about 32 countries, like in this case in South Africa, but they were the implementing partners. They were the guys who were actually doing it.
So what are the other areas that they are looking?
So TB is big, AMR obviously big, then pandemic.
So AMR, they are doing diagnostic?
Yeah, so AMR, there's work happening around these simplified blood culture solutions that they're looking at. They're also looking at more, I would say, I mean, if you were to look at IDST platforms, you really have BioFire from bioMiro, which is highly unaffordable. So they're looking at solutions, down the line, which are cheaper, more cost effective, and can be implemented easily. Molecular POCT, there's a lot of work happening on multiplex pathogens. They're working with a whole bunch of companies, including some of the guys who are really true point of care, like handheld.
Have you had experience with BioFire?
I personally haven't, but obviously it's a great technology, but adoption is very limited to expensive private care and tertiary settings, and also mostly in the global north. But it's a great platform, as I hear. And then there are other companies like BD and all, which are also doing. BD has unfortunately just divested its diagnostic systems business. So they are now going to be only. So they are spinning it out, and they are obviously looking for people who would buy it. So both the biosciences, that is their flow business, and the diagnostics business, they have spun off, because according to them it is not profitable, and it is sort of earnings per share is dragging, and they want to focus on high revenue medical business, which is what the core is.
Any more questions?
What's IKP's role in antibiotics and AMR space?
Good question. So I think IKP's role, I mean, specific to AMR, and I mean, I wouldn't say that we have a specific program which is targeted toward drug development or diagnostics, but there are a few interesting companies that are being incubated at IKP. I think this is one of the directions that I got from the board is that since I come from a diagnostics background, it'll be good to look at that how we can develop a more cutting edge portfolio as far as diagnostics, and then see drug development is obviously, which is very expensive, and if there can be mechanisms that can be put into place for IKP to be able to leverage funds, which can then be, I think it's essentially the same mechanism that we were doing at Find, where, as BG was asking, we had a team of scientists which were pretty good at their job, but they were not the ones who were doing the actual development. But because of the fact that of the good work that Find had done, there was a significant amount of global funding that they were able to attract to support the development of diagnostics. So I think that is something which probably we could look at, as within IKP. Notwithstanding the fact that the funding scenario is going to get a bit complicated and muddled over the next year or so, as US is pulling out and they are one big major source of funding. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing specific right now, but I think it is a role that potentially IKP could play. I mean, we obviously have a lot of companies on our campus, pharma companies, so there is a way to sort of work with them to see how we can be a part of, their programs, or if there are, any such companies or startups that we are supporting, if we can encourage some, connections with these companies for commercialization or technology transfer, that could be some ways to engage.
have one question. So how do you see this Gen AI role of this pharma space in basically in India?
I think it is picking up, specifically, a lot of these companies actually now have GCCs also in India, and they're also setting up their R&D facilities here, and they are going to do this. It's already happening. It's already started happening, and India, you have some of the best developers as far as AI and all of the other software is concerned. So they are very, very, very keen to sort of see how they can leverage the capabilities which are available and then apply it. And all the major companies right now have molecules which are in one way or the other connected to this AI piece. And it is not just the development part, as you saw. I think it is along the entire value chain that they're looking at leveraging AI. So I see this happening fairly quickly over the next 2 or 3 years, I guess.
Please.
Pleasure.
Sanjay, incentive to come to Bangalore is because his daughter is there.
He did
One of the
mention.
incentives.
So thank you for that insightful talk, especially reiterating the need for novel antimicrobial drugs. And especially it's alarming to know that South Asia will be in the worst side of the receiving end of the AMR problem. I hope more and more investments come to address the gap in the diagnostic field. Thank you so much for your time, and we are really thankful that you could make some time from the busy schedule. So I would request Aradhna to give us some memento for your talk. Please.
Thank you so much. Congratulations. Once again, Vijay.
Thank you so much. So what's Sanjay's program now?
So we did the corporate presentation. Probably we'll do a lab visit if you have time. And then
And then I'll see. When do you have to get back?
I'm okay.
So are you going to hold him for lunch or how?
yeah, if he has time, yes.
There's still some time, so
Yeah.
I don't want to unnecessarily prolong my stay here.
No.
So we'll go to the lab and maybe
If
sit.
lunch comes in 12:15?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what if you do that and then we can spend some
Sure,
time.
sure,
Sure. Thank you.
I'll put it in my office.
sure. I'll take this as the heavy.
I'm deleting the